This is the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Halenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland locations. Halenda's, the way sausage should taste. And now, here's Ted.
My special guest today is an award-winning actor, producer, and director. Many of you will remember her as host of the iconic Polka Dot Door television program, others for her role in one of the most popular soap operas of all time, The Young and The Restless. In addition, she is the founder of the Real World Screen Institute and the Real World Film Festival, which showcases talent who identify as Black, Indigenous, Asian, and people of color, which runs, the festival does, October 12th through to the 18th. Welcome to the podcast, Tonya Williams. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Such a pleasure to meet you too.
Now, you're originally from London, England. You came here when you were about 11 years of age. So you spent 11 years in London. And with that in mind, and the recent passing of Her Majesty the Queen, how did that affect you?
You know, it was really, it certainly wasn't a shock. She was 96 years
Yeah,
old,
of
but
course.
there was the feeling of a real loss of, it could be my age too. I'm 64, so I think we sort of cling to certain things that are the past,
Hmm.
and it really felt like it was the end of a piece of my history,
Hmm.
like an end of my memories. And even though I was born in England, my parents, who were Jamaican, were there. We moved to Jamaica when I was 2. So Jamaica is still very much a commonwealth, and they were still very sort of proud of that relationship with the Queen. No matter
Hmm.
what Britain might have done to all the islands, there was still that
Yeah.
pride about the Queen herself. And I think I just admire anyone who has that kind of staying power, her work ethic, the fact that she was a woman and she has impacted women in leadership positions, like the
Yeah.
view of that. And I was just thinking when she died, between King Charles and then it'll be King William and then it'll be King who's the grandson? Is that
I can't remember.
George? Yeah, it'll
It
be
is
King George.
George.
There could be a long time before women see a woman in that position, and I really feel fortunate because I think it was inspiring to see a woman in that kind of leadership role
Well, do you just think of
worldwide.
the changes that went on in her lifetime during her reign, the 70 years, the changes in terms of the respect that women now have versus where they were 70. I mean, I would imagine that 70 years ago, there were some of the more progressive chauvinists were just totally disgusted at the fact, even though it was part of the monarchy. But what do you mean? Why there's a woman ruling me?
And she talks about that. They had very little respect for her, and she
Yeah.
had to be she had to teach herself and be the smartest person in the room to gain any kind of respect. And I think any woman in any leadership role understands that now that we are primarily in a man's world, and you have to walk in the room being the person who knows the most
Yeah.
to be taken even slightly serious.
Well, King Charles has got big shoes to fill, and I don't know whether he's up for that. But that's another topic. You came here when you were, when I say here, I mean here in Canada, where I am,
Yes.
when you were 11 years of age, and to the city of Oshawa. Why Oshawa?
Yes. Well, that's when you're 11 years old, you don't really have much say
No,
in
you
where.
don't. No, of course not.
But that's where my mother had known people. My parents are divorced by then, and my mother knew a nurse because she had trained in England. So I think that's usually what happens with most
Hmm.
immigrants is they go to a place where people that they trust and that they know are at, just so that they'll know one person in that city. And it was very soon after she arrived that she got a job at Oshawa General. So
Hmm.
her original plan was to go to Vancouver actually, because she knew someone else in Vancouver.
Uh-huh.
Um, but she just was pit stopping in Oshawa and thought this is a great place to raise a child.
And then when did the move for you come to Toronto?
Well, because there was so little opportunity in Oshawa, and you have to understand, before I came to Oshawa, my life had been piano lessons and violin lessons and ballet classes and not so much that my parents thought that that was what I was going to become, but it was just what Jamaican parents did. When you
Hmm.
had a child, you just exposed them to a lot of stuff. So when I came to Oshawa, a lot of those things I was doing in Toronto. So she
Okay.
would drive me on the weekends, into Toronto for a class for this or that. Um, so it became a natural progression for me that Toronto was the city where
Right.
things were happening.
Hmm.
Um, and not that I was focused on the entertainment industry, but I actually thought my plan was to apply to York University and study their music. I loved classical music and I played like 5 instruments by then. So that was really the plan. And by just circumstance, in my last 2 years of high school, by then, those were the days we had a grade 13. So
Hmm.
grade 12 and 13, someone had seen me in Toronto and it was Judy Welch,
Right.
who way back
Right.
in the day, you'll remember she had an agency,
Yeah.
and she saw me
Big
with my mother
agency.
and she said, um, she was interested to know if I would want to go out for any commercials or anything like that. And my mom thought it was just another extracurricular, like a fun thing to do while I was doing my other things. But it ended up being the direction that my life took.
You did a little bit of modeling. You were Miss Black Ontario in 1977. So now we fast forward to 1980, and you find yourself on the Polka Dot Door, whose theme I can't get out of my head for the last 3 days. How
Well, you
did
know
that
what?
all? Go
Well, I
ahead.
was going to
Sorry.
say how that happened really was I was doing a bunch of commercials in very small parts, not really taking acting seriously, not thinking that this was anything I wanted to do in my life because I didn't understand the process of acting. But as I was on set, I was meeting professional actors and really realized that, oh, this is a profession because you have to understand my father was a lawyer, a barrister who then became a judge. My mother was a nurse. I'm an only child. I didn't come from a background of thinking that the entertainment industry. My father would have been horrified if we talked about that. A lot
Hmm.
of Jamaican parents at that time, that was a very low grade, degrading thing to want to
Yeah.
admit that you're in the entertainment industry. So, so when I was in these things and I met these wonderful people and thought about the psychology of acting and the breadth of it and the studying one had to do, I decided to apply to Ryerson in the drama program and got
Right.
in that program. And so that was the beginning of me really studying. Now, Polka Dot Door was hardly the kind of thing that we were studying in drama school, but it
Yeah.
was a gig. And it was,
Yeah.
and if you go back to the 80s, the kind of opportunities for a Black actress, the things that were coming that my
Hmm.
agents would say, they were mostly prostitutes and illiterates, and these were not the things I wanted to go out for. So when something like Polka Dot Door, I grabbed it, an opportunity to do something where I was representing something in a positive way
Right.
to a young group of people who might have never seen a Black person sort of before.
True
That
enough.
really intrigued me.
Who was on the show with you at that time? Because you did it for
Well,
three
the way
seasons.
they did the show is not the way the people thought it. In a year, they coupled people together, and we only shot 1 week in a year. So all these different people shot like 1 week, and then they would play them, and then the next week next year you'd be invited to maybe shoot another week of just
Wow.
that. But they kept playing them over and over and over. I think I only did 3 weeks in total over 3 years, but
Wow.
that was the norm how it went. But you have to when people are 1 and 2 and 3 years old, they can literally watch the same show every other week and they love
Yeah.
it. They like the repetition of it. They learn all the songs and they see
Yeah.
the people. But people actually thought I was on the show for 3 years, like running every day. But no, it was really 3 weeks work over
No, you're
three
right
years.
because I have a 3-year-old granddaughter who watches a couple of different shows, and she'll watch them over and over and over and
They
over,
love it.
and it's
Yeah.
driving my daughter and my son all crazy. But I guess they deserve it because they did the same thing to me and my wife. So now we're even.
Exactly.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to pursue this at a higher level that was available here in Canada? Ergo, time to move to LA.
I kind of remember it was 1985. I was on a sitcom called Check It Out. I was being asked to, co-host the Miss Teen Canada pageant. I was what they called one of the biggest working Black actors in Canada. And I went to this one audition, and an actress there had said, "Oh, we better all go. Tanya's here. She books everything." And that was for me the first time the penny dropped. That I'm like, I'm booking everything, and I'm barely making a living. Like I can't even make a living.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of me going, it's not that there's more opportunities, there are no opportunities. I am
Yeah.
actually working in every opportunity. So 85 was my decision to start thinking about making that move to the States. And I made it by 1987 because I'm a bit of a planner. So it was about finding that agent ahead of time, getting the immigration, getting the visas ready, so that whole process took about 2 years. And then I moved to LA in
W-
1987.
You were on Boogie, which was a show on City TV back when City was on back on Queen Street, right? What year was that?
Oh my God, that was before any of the acting stuff. So I want to say 1976, 1977, right around. It was even before I won the Miss Black Ontario pageant. It was kind of a thing that a lot of high school students. It
Hmm.
must have been, I must have met some high school people in Toronto who were like, "Oh, come down to this thing," and it was just fun. And it was dancing in the, Soul Train was big at that time. This was Canada's watered down version of Soul
Yeah.
Train
Right. Right. Right.
at the time.
So you land in Los Angeles, and you end up getting a part on one of the most popular soap operas in the history of television, The Young and the Restless.
Yeah, that took about 3 years too, because I didn't start that till 1990. So from 1987, the best part is I arrive in LA in 1987 just in time for a 6 months writer strike, screenwriter strike.
Yeah.
So I had plenty of time to find a great, it's always great to be in acting class. So I found a great coach and I got in a class and I just honed myself and got used to the environment. It's very different when you arrive in LA, it's very overwhelming because the amount of auditions I did in a year was the amount I did in a week. And you're just rushing from audition to it. So your odds become better. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, chances are you're going to book more stuff because you're just out at so much. But I didn't book many, many things, but the odds were sort of against me that I was booking things. So people were like, oh my God, Tanya's doing so well. Didn't even have the heart to say I'm probably not booking 99% of it.
When you look back, was there any auditions that you went to, or a specific audition that you went to that you didn't get on a program or a film that became very popular? Then you look back and you think, "Damn, I wish I got that."
No, I can't say I look back and said it, but there was an audition that I was devastated about. It's before I decided to make that move. I was on, as I told you, that sitcom, Check It Out.
Yeah.
And I had started then thinking, oh, I need to go to the States. And I just got my visa. And my agents had me fly to New York, my Toronto agents, to audition for a new Norman um, Mailer sitcom. I think it's Norman Mailer who did
Norman Lear.
Norman Lear. I'm so sorry. Norman
Right.
Mailer is a completely different person. I
Yeah.
just remember now. So it was called Me and Mrs. C, and I booked it. And then I had to come back to Toronto and hear that I booked it. But my agent here had to get me out of the contract. And because agents in Toronto were not savvy like American agents, my agent was actually honest and said, oh, she's on a sitcom here and we have to get her out of it. They went with their second choice. Just they heard that and went with their second choice. Whereas in the States, they would have gone, oh, no, she's perfectly fine and ready to start on Monday. And they
Yeah.
would have figured it out behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah.
So I lost out on that. I was really devastated because it would have been a really big leading role. I mean, the show only ended up going, I think, one season or something, and then it ended anyway. So that's why I said there's nothing I look back on, and it would have. But I was quite devastated at that moment, which was always a good reminder that there's no one opportunity. That's what that lesson taught me. There's no one opportunity that changes the trajectory of your career or your life. The one thing I loved that I got was within months of arriving, I did a TV, what do I call it, commercial for AT&T. And it was such a simple little commercial. And I just say at the end of it, thank you for using AT&T and smile, not knowing that they cut that into 7 national spots, my end piece. So
Yeah.
for the next 3 years until I booked Y&R and while I was booking other small jobs, I had a very hefty, nice salary coming
Yeah.
in for 3 years, more than I'd ever made in Canada.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
Well, fall's coming, the kids are back in school, and many of us are easing back into the office at least some of the time. But it is time to get back to work. Time to ditch the sweatpants, t-shirts, and put on some real work clothes. Dress for success. And we've got you covered from business casual to sports jackets to suits. Virtually everything to look your professional best. The Tom's Place Back to Work sale features new fall fashion arrivals like 100% wool suits starting at just $199 each. Sports jackets at 50% off. A crazy selection of sports and dress shirts for $66 each. And lips and dress shirts regularly $145, now only $66. Everything is on sale. Tom's Place is open daily 11 to 6 weekdays, 10 to 5 Saturday, and 12 to 5 Sunday. Visit Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
My guest is actor Tonya Williams. The AT&T commercial you talk about was directed by John Frankenheimer, who did Birdman of Alcatraz, The Manchurian Candidate,
I
for
could
example.
not believe it when I walked in the room and this huge, massive act. I mean, this director, that was the time. And even now, that was the beginning of really major film directors were doing TV commercials. So it was an amazing opportunity for me.
Yeah. So when you auditioned for The Young and the Restless, is it the role that you eventually got, was that the role you auditioned for? Because sometimes it doesn't work that way. You audition for one role and you get a different part.
No, exactly. My agent. So I had made it clear to my agents that I don't want to go out for those roles that are negative stereotypes about Black people. I didn't want to do them in Canada. I didn't want to do them here. So I've been going out on a lot of sitcoms that were fun and nice and light. And then they said, "Oh, you have an opportunity to go do this soap opera." They really didn't want me to do it. Agents don't want you to do soap operas because they feel it takes you off the table, and it's not the high grade acting, where the money is as much.
Yeah.
So they said the character's called Drusilla. She's like an illiterate. She's on the street. She's homeless. They were naming everything that I already said I didn't want to go out for. But they said, "We know you don't want to go for this role, but go because the casting directors should just see you."
Yeah.
So I went and I did a terrible job I did it purposely. There's no way I wanted this role. In fact, I did the role speaking the way I speak right now. I spoke in a way that no way was I going to be hired to be a literate homeless person on the street, whatever. Of course, I'm making a stereotype right now. I'm sure there are lots of homeless people that speak exactly like me. But at the time, there weren't in the TV business. And then within a day or two, my agent called me back and said, "Oh, you have a callback." And I'm like, "A callback for what?" And they were like, this soap opera. I'm like, I really couldn't even process. There's no way they were gonna. But he goes, "But it's for a role called Olivia. She's like this doctor, and she's like all the things that I wanted to represent in a really positive way."
Right.
And I read it and I loved it, and I went in, and I was the only one in the waiting room. That's always unusual when you don't see any other actors in the waiting room. So I thought maybe they're seeing us at very different times. And then I went in, and this time Bill Bell, the creator of the show, was sitting in the room, and the woman who played Aunt Mamie was there. It felt like a big deal for that I was just doing a first reading on this role. So I did the reading, and then everyone like quiet like they do, and the casting person is usually the only person that talks, and they're like, "Okay, thank you." And I go, "Thank you." And I walked out of the room, and I walked down the hallway, and I take the elevator down to the main floor, and I'm walking along the main floor, and I just made it out the door, and the casting director came running after me, and she said, "Can you come back in? We'd like you to go up to wardrobe for a fitting." I mean, that's how
Wow.
quick those things can be. And I
Hmm.
was thinking a fitting, like it was just, and right then my mobile phone rang, and the agent saying, "You've booked this role." And that's all I knew about it at that moment. The sides that I had read that I was impressed with, just the audition sides. And then I started on the show literally like 3 days later. And I did not watch the show and didn't know anything about the show. I don't think I even had a concept that there were these things called soap operas. I just didn't have a concept of them. So when I had called my mom, and anybody who knows parents who don't know anything about the industry, nor I could have said, "Mom, I'm starring in a movie with Tom Cruise," and she would have gone, "Oh, that's nice, honey." She has no idea who any of the people are. But when I said, "I'm on this show, it's called Young and the Restless," and oh my God, I thought my mom had lost her mind. She was
Yeah.
like, that was a show. She knew it. She couldn't believe it. She was so excited. And I was stunned. It's the first time I've ever mentioned anything to my mother that she knew anything about.
I was just going to say, Tanya Williams is my guest. I was just going to say, Tanya, that soap opera fans are the most dedicated and loyal of all fans. They're like
Absolutely.
they're as rabid as sports fans are.
Yeah. Not only are they rabid, but they force their children to watch it so they become rabid.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's an infection that carries on through the families.
And my late father-in-law was a huge fan of the Young and the Restless, and which I always thought was kind of funny because to me, growing up, I guess maybe just because I'm a guy, right? Thinking, well, that's a kind of a woman's thing, soap operas, but
You'd
not at
think that
all.
until you were in it. No, and then
Yeah,
tons of football players and basketball players and all these sports people, they would see us at events and they would go crazy for the soap opera people.
yeah.
And of course, it depends what kind of job you have. I think
Hmm.
people who worked nights and evenings sometimes needed something, like to get them to sleep. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned athletes. I mean, wasn't Wayne Gretzky? Didn't he do a guest role in the Young and the Restless at one point?
He might have.
Maybe you might not have
Who
been
I
there at that
remember.
point.
Yeah, who I remember is a some famous. I don't know sports people, but definitely we had some famous baseball people
Yeah.
come on the show. I just can't remember the names of who they were now.
Yeah, yeah, because I think a number of athletes have been on soap operas over the years. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, like when you're going when you're shopping at your local Tops, for example, in LA, you got people walking up to you thinking, oh my God, look, it's Olivia, 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 I love you, I love you,"
Yeah,
and they
much
think they know you, and they think you really are that character.
exactly. And much more when I was on the show, not so much now, but I went to the Cannes Film Festival in 2002 when I was still on the show, and all my friends that are in Paris or were at Cannes, they're very snotty about soap operas. They're true auteurs, true film people, and we would walk down the Croisette, and all the people who work at Cannes, meaning all the workers in the hotels and the restaurants, they were going crazy when they saw me.
Yeah,
And my very toughy friends, they were like, why are people pointing at you? And they had no concept of the impact of the show.
yeah.
And they were completely horrified that people
And
should care that much.
And you said that agents don't like soap operas because you get locked into them, but actors, on the other hand, are more than happy to get a soap opera. I would guess because the roles seem to be long lasting. You did what, a dozen years or so on The Young and the Restless?
Yeah, I did 19 years in total.
19 years.
So what's interesting is
Wow.
it depends what kind of a career you want.
Yeah.
I've always loved just working as an actor. That's the career I want. Just be a working actor. But if you're planning and strategizing, and your deal is to become like an A-list actor where you have more power and you've got sort of that's a great direction to go. By the way, it's just not a direction that interested me. I love
Hmm.
being a fly on the wall. I love just walking around and being a regular person, but just working as an actor. That's what interested me. So the soap opera world was perfect for the things that I love to do. But
Right.
I have friends who they want the $20 million paychecks, and they want to be A-list where you're the top of the first five people that the world needs to know when they're thinking about projects. That's a whole other business plan, and you need a team behind you and you need a plan around it. And if that's what you really want, I tell people all the time, go for that. But if you know that's not your personality, you can be very unhappy in that journey.
You won an Emmy Award for your work on The Young and the Restless.
Actually, only nominated,
Oh,
only
nominated.
nominated, only nominated, but I did win two NAACP Image Awards.
Yeah, which is most people are not familiar with those awards, but they are quite prestigious. Tell us more about it.
Well, it was great. I've been nominated twice for daytime Emmys, and the ride. What's the ride of being nominated is so fantastic because that's what lasts. Like from the minute you're nominated, then all these things happen, and and then the actual award show, and then you in 1 second you hear if you win or you lose. So that's very short.
Yeah.
But the months leading up to it, it's really quite wonderful, and I'm glad I had that experience. Um, but those were, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's great because you feel, they have these luncheons just for the nominees, and you
Mm-hmm.
get to meet other people who
Mm-hmm.
are not just even in soap operas, but other nominees in the Emmys altogether. So I'm glad I had those experiences.
But the NAACP Image Award, talk to me more about that and what that meant
Well,
to you.
it means a lot because, for a very long time, people in the industry who were Black, people who were people of color, they didn't even have an opportunity to be nominated ever. They didn't have those kind of roles. They didn't get to be. So the NAACP created these award shows that the Image Awards is one of the most prestigious that you can be nominated in. But I think it's lovely to be in a room filled of people who understand your
Mm-hmm.
struggle in a way that no one else can understand your struggle.
Right.
And I think we applaud and support whether you're nominated or not. Just surviving, just working in the industry is so challenging. But when you're a Black person, it's just multiplied by everything. And when you're a woman and you're Black, it's
Yeah.
quite challenging.
During this period of time that you were with Young and Restless, you also went to Rwanda in 1995 on a peace mission with World Vision. How did that come about?
Well, they had reached out and asked me, but even before even when I got into acting, as I told you, my father was a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
and then moved into being a judge. My mother, being a nurse, went from the time I could walk. I'd always been a part of social justice things. My mother always took me, even though we lived a fairly privileged life. She always made sure she took me to less fortunate. I played with kids that were in underprivileged areas, and I didn't see a difference. She wanted me not to be someone who saw, because Jamaicans can be very class structured, and she did not want me to be that kind of a person. So even growing up, I was my father bought me when I was 12 years old. He bought me a book called about Tricky Dicky. So I was reading Watergate. I was always sort of aware of politics and things that were going on in the world. So when they had reached out, I thought, what a great opportunity, one, to be taken to an area that I couldn't have gotten in
Mm-hmm.
on my own, and for people in that area, because other than myself and I thought one other person, everyone else that went on that trip was white. And I
Wow.
think it's a negative thing to constantly be bringing white people into war torn countries where Black people are seeing white people in that way. I don't think it actually makes it for a positive thing. I think they feel they're being judged, and, uh, you know, they're looking at oppressors who've created the entire situation to begin with.
Yeah.
So it was a great experience for me because I didn't go there. This is what I was shocked about. Some of the white actors that they had brought actually on the plane over were strategizing how they could solve the problems of Rwanda. And I thought
Yeah.
that was hilarious. A 5,000-year-old problem was going to be solved somehow by these actors.
Yeah.
I really went to learn. That was my reason for going. I wanted to be like the audience watching, as just what could we see and what could we do to help? What is it your needs are? That was more important to me. I think it's important to always, when you're, especially when you're talking to people who are going through experiences that you can't even understand. I certainly couldn't understand that experience. I've never gone through anything like that in my life. I think our job is to listen
Mm.
and to comfort, and just listening is a form of comfort, and to try and then communicate that back to the audience that you already have as to what you could do.
And so,
Um,
as we move into the 2000s, you don the director's hat for a film in 2004 called "The Kink in My Hair," which was a big Broadway hit, was it not?
No, so it's a Canadian thing called the, you know what, it might have gone to Broadway. No, I shouldn't say that. At the time, the writer had the small play, and Vision TV was looking to adapt some plays to something, and they came to me and said, would you be one of the producers on, would you direct this episode? And I'd never directed anything before. So I love experiences I've never had before. And I did that, but the show went on to be a series on Global, I believe. I was not part of the series because then I went back to my, with the demands I had on my own show. I can only do the pilot, but because I took
Hmm.
time off to do that, but I couldn't go and try and direct a whole series. But just that experience alone was wonderful. But I'm trying to, as you said that, I think the writer of the original play did it in went and did the play in London, went and did it on Broadway, but the part I was a part of, it was just a Vision TV, one-off, pilot that they did.
Okay, let's talk about something that's near and dear to your heart right now, which is the Real World Screen Institute and the Real World Film Festival, which I mentioned at the outset of this interview, is coming up October 12th. Runs from the 12th through to the 18th. Where?
So the opening night's gonna be at the Royal, and
Mm-hmm.
we're also gonna be screening at the Paradise Cinema, and we're gonna be
Mm.
screening at the ROM.
Oh, great.
So people go to the website realworld.ca, REEL, realworld.ca, and they can see all the information. But we also do a series of industry panels. We've got in and we're doing in person. You know, ever since COVID, um, everything we used to do was completely in person, but then we opened up online, and now we're always going to be hybrid. So we have in person activities, we have online activities, and there's something for everyone. Our festival, I think Toronto has the most film festivals of any city in the world. I literally think that.
Yeah,
There's over like 120 film festivals.
yeah.
And people think we're all the same, but all film festivals, look at them closely. They all have a different what they're actually trying to push. And they're all
Mm-hmm.
positive, by the way.
Yeah.
But Real World's agenda is only Canadian talent. So that has always been my dream. You know, the reason for starting Real World for me is every time I would travel back from Los Angeles and be invited to speak somewhere, the young people were coming up to me, especially the people of color, and they only had one question. They weren't saying, how do I get in here in Canada? They were just asking me, how do I get to the US? And I thought that was so sad because
Yeah.
it had been, 15 years. And I thought they still don't have opportunity in the way that I didn't have opportunity. And that had to stop. And so the only way I could see that was we had to make the changes. There's so much racism that was going on in the industry in Canada. The worst part of racism for me is not the outright racists, it's the people who think there's no problem at all. So I would go to the CBCs or the Bell Medias or the Rogers and whatever, and they go, Tanya, we don't have a problem. And I'm like, open your eyes, look at your office. There are only white people working here. There are only white people on your board of directors. There are only white people behind the cameras. They're only, I mean, how can you say there's absolutely no problem? Because
Yeah.
looking at things like that becomes a norm.
Mm-hmm.
People see it and they just don't see. I asked somebody that, and I asked an older white gentleman once who, in the last 2 years, said he had his eyes open to diversity. But I go, you've been in the business like 35 years. When you were looking around and you did not see anyone of color, what did you think? And he goes, I just didn't even see it. So it's like a blindness that is a shock to someone of color, but they didn't mean it in a mean-spirited way. They just did not even think about it. And me as a person of color, that's all I see. I look around and I see no one there.
Well, I think one of the problems is that people tend to see what they want to see, or they don't see what really is there. Like people, you talk to people about racism, and they say, "Well, it's not like it used to be." Like back in the day when they had water fountains for colored people only, and
Yeah,
water entrances for restaurants for white people only. Things are much better now. Well, are they? And then all of a sudden, George Floyd pops into the news.
exactly. So the only good news, and I'm sorry George Floyd literally had to die
Yeah.
for an awakening to happen in this way. And the good news was what I've been talking about for years, the power of the screen, the power of seeing something. People had been talking about that for decades, but no one had filmed it in that way. So people assumption was, oh, those black people are just overreacting to something.
Yeah.
But watching an 8-minute video of a police officer murdering someone in broad daylight
Yeah.
was like such a shock. It wasn't a shock to black people because black people were saying, we've been telling you this for decades, but
Yeah.
you don't want to see it. So the power of the screen is why I wanted to get authentic storytelling is so important. Getting people who are living these lived experiences to be able to capture them on screen. You have to remember, way back from the National Film Board, earliest things, it's only been white directors, mostly white men, who have
Hmm.
told the story of indigenous people, who have told the story of black people, who have told, like, how could they possibly tell a story through colonial eyes that could properly give you the vision of what those people experienced? So it's so important to me. And just that thing that happened recently with the Canadian Screen Awards, where Barry Averish came up on stage and talked about he'd done the Oscar Peterson documentary, which a lot of
Yeah.
people were upset about. But then I felt so embarrassed for
Why were they
him.
upset about it?
They were upset about it because
Because there's a white man
so
doing it?
few. Well, there's so few black directors that get those kind of opportunities.
Right.
And when you give any director that kind of an opportunity, award is going to be won. So when you give white directors the opportunities to tell stories that are not their authentic, they don't know anything about that community. They've
Right.
never lived those experiences. And then they win an award. What you're doing is you're suppressing filmmakers and creators of color to take that next step. They could be winning the award, which moves their careers along. White directors have been telling these stories, which win those awards, which move their careers along. And
Hmm.
so the sad part to me was he didn't get up and just humbly say, I feel so proud to be able to tell a story. It's not my community, but I felt proud that I was. No, he said, basically, this was a free for all that anyone should be able to tell anyone's stories. And that was upsetting to people who thought you were given a privileged opportunity only because you were white,
Hmm.
because other directors have not had the experiences you've had that put you in that position because of the oppression within the industry that they've had to deal with. And so you can't actually see that. When you're privileged, you can't actually see how other people were oppressed so that you could move ahead.
So at the Real World Screen Institute, which you founded, and you're the executive director, you're dealing with talent, what actors that are black, indigenous, Asian
Yeah,
people,
directors,
director,
producers, writers, and
right?
also people crews behind the camera.
And they share a commonality, and yet are the Asian concerns the same as the black concerns, the same as the indigenous concerns? They're
Not at
different
all.
levels, right?
That's the wonderful thing about real world is even though we are fighting all those fights, we see them as very separate fights. I mean, when you're someone who might be Middle Eastern, dealing more with religion, meaning Muslim, and the
Yeah.
the prejudices that are around that religion are very different than someone who's black, who's dealing with a dark skin color as opposed to someone dealing with a light skin color. What the damage colonialism did was it taught people, if you had to go almost on a Darwin scale, it taught people that the closer you are to looking white, the more welcomed and comfortable we are with you. And
Hmm.
as you go down that Darwin scale, the darker your skin is, the woollier your hair is. It means it's the further away from us you are the more undesirable. And that is still the fight we're fighting today. Because even though the doors are opening for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, even within those different races, they have already noticed that the lighter skin and the fairer people, and it's the same thing in slavery, by the way. You'll remember the lighter skin and the fairer you were, you got to work in the house in the better jobs. And the darker skin you were with the woollier hair, you stayed in the field because white people didn't want to see you in the house. They
Right.
wanted to see people that looked closer with more the refined, they called, features. And so that is a struggle in every race, and it still continues today. Um, I think someone the other day was telling me how he goes, I have a ton of people working in my company that are diverse, except they were all East Asian. So I said to him, so you don't have a ton of different kinds of people. You have East Asian people. So you're clearly comfortable with one kind of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what needs we have to change. But I think it's because we all have to look at our own biases. We all have them. Not just white
Yes.
people, by the way. I mean Black people have their biases about other races. South Asian people have their, East Asian people have their. We all have to look at our own individual prejudices and our own biases and work at them every single day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true with sex as well. I mean, there are sexists, right? Sexism
Yeah.
exists everywhere you look.
No,
You can,
absolutely. So, I mean, we have a long way to go as the planet where
yeah.
we actually treat every single human being with a real sense of respect and equality. We're a long way from that. Of
Yeah.
course, we're making progress. I mean, it's definitely, I'm happy that we're no longer, have different separate bathrooms for people of different
Yeah.
colors,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we
Yeah.
still have a long way to go. And then the fight that I feel it's a fight. I don't mean a fight necessarily that you put on gloves and hit someone. I mean the same fight that it's a struggle. That's what I should say.
Yeah.
It's a constant struggle and work. It's pushing a boulder up a hill. It's trying to explain. I said that to someone. I feel so exhausted at 64. I'm exhausted because most of my life has not just been focusing on working as an actor and creating real world. A huge part of my life is explaining things, trying to get a community of people to understand something that they do not understand.
Yeah,
Kind of like explaining to someone who was born blind what the color blue looks like, what
yeah,
it is. That's how it feels. And so I try to tell, most of the people who greenlight projects at the top level are still white people. And a lot of the creators that come to them, it's so tiring for them. They're not just explaining their story, they have to explain why the story, why this, if that person doesn't understand their story at all, or the culture that it comes from, or why they're doing it, they still have the power to say no. Our broadcast station is not going to greenlight this.
yeah. Well, the problem is in some situations, people plain and simple don't get it, and if you don't
They
get
plain and
it,
simple don't get it.
you can't
Um,
you can't change. It's like you can't change stupid.
you can't change different. And I honestly don't think that people necessarily are doing it to be mindfully cruel or to be
No.
mindfully racist or to be mindfully. They're just there's just a lack of education. There's
Hmm.
in school. I remember going to, as you said, I came to Canada when I was 11. I don't remember reading a single book that was written by anyone black. And the only book I could have thought of that was maybe about someone black would have been like Tom Sawyer.
Yeah.
Like it's so if you have absolutely no education from the earliest level teaching you about the heroes, that's what we all learn, by the way. When you're a person of color, you learn about all the white heroes. You're just
Hmm.
not taught any of the indigenous heroes, any of the black heroes, any of the Asian heroes, and they were here, just nobody
Yeah.
talks about them. So
True.
you start to feel like you're invisible, or that, and this is the worst part, you start to feel like your community didn't contribute to the creation of, for instance, Canada. But our
Mhm.
communities were vital in the creation of Canada. They
Right.
just are not talked about, or talked about, or taught. But real world for me, that's what it's really about. The stories that we're showing, that we're telling, that we're giving the creators opportunity to not only make those stories, but it's not just about creating content. It's about getting those jobs in the broadcast channels. It's about having a podcast, where you can talk about things. It's about getting in all areas of the what I call the entertainment industry. But the entertainment industry is what moves everything. It moves politics.
Yeah.
It moves finance. Um, it's not a trivial thing. It's a huge weapon, and it can be turned against. It can turn
Yeah.
people to hate, and we've seen that over the last, especially the few years. A lot of divisiveness have come out of this from the screen industry.
The real world. It's a tough one to get wrap my tongue
Real
around.
world,
The real
real
world.
world.
The Real World Film Festival, October 12th through the 18th. A great collection of films, all kinds of different films. I would imagine short films,
Oh,
documentaries as well.
absolutely. Shorts and features, documentaries, narratives. And this is our 22nd
Yeah,
film
that's
festival. So we've
incredible.
been around for a while, and we really encourage people to come out and watch these films and see a part, especially because you're supporting Canadian talent.
Yep.
And that's what it is. I always feel like Canadians seem to be the least audience in the world that supports Canadian talent in the screen industry, for instance. You can go to Nigeria and there are people that will watch like anything if they know it's made by a Nigerian. Jamaicans will watch anything made by a Jamaican, but then Canadians will be like, yeah, maybe. I was like, why is that? Why don't we like to support our own talent?
I don't know. It's a very, very good question. For more information, you have a website people can go to.
Yes, realworld.ca, just REEL, realworld.ca, and everything's on there.
Tonya Williams, actor, creator of the Real World Film Festival, coming to Toronto October 12th through the 18th. Tonya, a real pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for your time.
Oh, it was great chatting with you too, Ted. Thank you so much.
All the best.
The Ted Wallacham podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And Helenda's, the meat people. Enjoy their award-winning products at selected Metro, Sobeys, Fortino's, and Foodland locations. Helenda's, the way sausage should taste. The Ted Wallacham podcast is produced by Joey Roselli. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. I'm Becky Coles. Submit your questions and comments to ted@twmedia.ca.